Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Power Query for Finance Users. This episode is about interface and documentation. Coming from a finance background, documentation and audit trail are very important for me. So before showing you anything else, I wanted to take you through this functionality. The agenda for today is showing you a few bits of the interface, in particular the queries pane and the applied steps. If we continue from where we left last time, you will remember that here we had connected to a separate file trial balance for 2 periods, and we had deleted the amount year to date. This was our query here, so if we want to go back into it, we go to Data, Queries and Connections. That will display the pane here on the right side, and we right click on it and click on Edit. This will take us to the Power Query interface. So the interface here is made up of a few bits. So we have the ribbon here at the top that's got all the buttons. We then have the queries pane here that would show us all the queries we're doing. For each individual query, we will have the applied steps here on the right side, and then each step in the query will have a bit of code here in the formula bar. In our example here, we only have one query, which is the one from an Excel connection, but obviously we can have here different queries coming from a CSV file, from a folder, and so on. So if we had here multiple queries, we want to get a bit organized and organize them in a logical manner. So here on the left side in the queries pane, what you can do, you can add folders or groups. So for example, best practice is to add an input folder, so that probably would have all your connections. You can then have like a transformations folder, and you can have, for example, an output folder. And of course you can also have nested folders within them, as it will allow you to organize them better. So for example here I can drag this one here into my input folder. Obviously I've already done here some transformations, but I could go back and say I don't want to remove the column yet because that's my input here, and I would like to, when I do my transformation, to put it in a new folder. So here when I do that, I can right click, and I've got two options here, duplicate and reference. So what's the difference between them? Duplicate would create a copy of the query, while reference will just reference the last step. So for example, if you look here, if I click on duplicate, what it's done, it's copied the exact same steps, right? This could be useful in some situations. But if I click on reference, what it will do here, see, the source here refers to the first query here. So I'll just rename this one just to show you what the difference is. This is reference, and then this is duplicate. Yeah. A good way to visualize this is if you go to View and Query Dependencies. You can see this is my connection here to the profit and loss separate Excel file, and this has been loaded here into the profit and loss. Now, if I reference this query, it flows from this one, but if I duplicate it, it's like a separate branch. And this is a good way of the query dependencies. Is also a very good audit trail in case the query is not properly documented. If I close this here, now when I create additional queries, apart from organizing them in the folder, a good practice is also to add some text. I can click here properties, and I can add here for later on. It happened to many times that I forgot what I've done, so I can put here, this is to remind myself next time of what this is, right? And click OK. And if you see, when I hover over it, I get the hint here. So this would be a good structure to organize, folders and some description to always know what exactly you're doing in the query. When it comes to the right side here, the applied steps, I'm not going to emphasize too much. There's different ways of doing things. So for example, if I want to remove a column, I could select the column here and click remove. At the same time, I could go on the ribbon here and say remove column. So there's different way of doing things. It's just a matter of going into there and exploring what best works for you. So in this instance here, I just want to remove this column, just simple transformation, and then I want to apply a filter here on the period. Click OK. Right, I can see the steps here. Even if you don't know a lot about Power Query, this already reads an audit trail. It tells you, well, I've removed the column, I applied a filter. Best practice here is, of course, you can always rename the step. So I could say filter row, and I could put here P1, and that gives me a bit more about what I've done. The other option here, if you want more detail and there's not enough space here to rename it, you could always go to again properties, and I can add here a bit more about I filtered by P1 because I only wanted this period. And now you can see there's a hint here, an information icon, and when you hover over it, it will tell you what you've done there. So always remember, when you do something, document it properly. The other thing about apply steps is, don't worry if you get something wrong. With apply steps, you can always delete them. So you can see each step's got a delete button here. So don't worry if you get something wrong, you can always delete, redo it again. Or you can go here to the cogwheel. Some steps have a cogwheel. So here where I apply the filter for period equals P1, I can go on the cogwheel and I can change my filter here. I can put P2 or P3 and so on. Another thing to know here about apply steps, you can always rearrange them. So you can, for example, drag them. I can drag this one, and then they get rearranged. So how this happens is, if you see here, this step here references the previous step's source, and then if I go to remove column, this step here references the previous step filtered rows. You can see it here in the formula bar. So that's how it works. But sometimes if you do this, you can break the query, because for example, if you're trying to filter for a column that you've already deleted, it won't work. So that's why take care when you're rearranging the steps. Because we mentioned breaking the query, let's do this on purpose and see if it's hard to troubleshoot an error. Well, first what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take these two queries here and copy them to transformations, just drag them to transformations, and then I'm going to reference this one here, and then I'll just call this one my final, and then again drag it to output here, and I'm going to apply here another filter or amount. Right, now to break this query, I'm going to do one of the steps here, and because I applied a filter on the period, I can go and delete the period. Right, delete the period, and then if I go, I'm just going to save it to show you what happens. So you get an error here. We was trying to refresh the query, and it says the period of the record wasn't found. Right, so I'm going to go back here to this one with the reference, because that's where I deleted the period, and you can see it's got the exclamation mark, so that means there's an error somewhere. And because the final one references this one, the final one also has an exclamation mark. So to troubleshoot that, sometimes you have to go from the backwards. So I go on the final one and I check here as all the steps working. You can see this one gets an error, this one also gets an error. So going backward, I go to the reference one. This one doesn't work, this one doesn't, oh, this one works. So that means the issue is on this filter step, and I can also, Power Query gives me a hint, the period of the record wasn't found. So I can go on this step where I've got remove columns, and that's how I can tell, well, the period here has been removed, so I need to delete this bit here. This period column needs to stay. Oh, as soon as I fix it, you can see all the steps and all the queries are working now. And that's the way to troubleshoot an error. It's quite self-explanatory. You just have to go backwards, find that step, and see what's happening with that step. Thank you for joining me in this episode. Please click like and subscribe, and join me next time when we start exploring some of the use cases with Power Query. Thank you.